Welcome to the very start of a new video series dedicated to the Chronicles of Drunagor, the cooperative dungeon crawling board game from Creative Game Studios. Actually, when I say a board game, I really mean an entire franchise of games and expansions. Later in this video, we'll take a look at making sense of all those boxes of adventure-y goodness, but first an introduction to this video series. Above all else, these videos are designed to help you get more confident and familiar with the rules. Even though the game has been out for a while, and I'm undeniably late to the party, I'm not going to assume that you already know how to play. I'll start with the very basics, and progress to some of the crunchier rules near the end of the series. If you already have some experience adventuring in Darren, I hope you'll join us anyway, because a bit of a refresher never hurt anyone. When you're knee-deep in darkness and facing off against a horde of slavering monstrosities, you really don't want to discover that you've forgotten how to load your crossbow. Having said that, I'm not going to cover every single rule and edge case, or we'd be here until the corrupted and pestilent cows come home. Nor am I expecting you to studiously memorise every little rule I present. Personally, I consider learning a large rule set to be a journey, not a one-shot. For example, the game has quite a few conditions and resources represented by various tokens, and even more keywords and terms. It would be pretty silly to try and memorise them all before you even start playing. It's usually more fun to look up the relevant rules when you first encounter them. This approach also provides an exciting sense of discovery as you encounter new monsters, heroes and terrain with effects you've never seen before. In fact, I'll sometimes pop this little icon on the screen to indicate that a rule or definition is especially well suited to looking up in the rulebook. So it's kind of a hint that you don't need to stress out about committing it to memory. Page 54 of the rulebook is where you'll find the legendary Conditions, Keywords and Terms dictionary. It's an indispensable guide to all the terms you'll find on game components, and if you only bookmark one page in the entire rulebook, this would be the one. On the other hand, there are some rules which you really want to internalise, so I'll pop up this little Don't Forget icon for rules which are suited to tattooing on some part of your body, or at the very least searing into your cerebral cortex. There will be plenty of gameplay examples, but definitely no spoilers. Which brings us to the rather fundamental question, which rules am I going to cover? Well, before we talk about the expansions, let's start with the core box. This is the centre of the Drunagor universe, because if you don't have the core box, you're not able to play anything else. In short, I won't be discussing the version 1.0 rules, which come from the original 2019 Kickstarter campaign. I've nothing against the 1.0 rules. I'm just hoping to finish these videos before I reach the age where I look like the Lich's older brother. So I'll be basing all my videos on the 1.5 rulebook, which can be identified by the enormous V1.5 printed at the top of the first page. If you purchase your core box from the second crowdfunding campaign, then you're already on board the version 1.5 train. The same goes for those who acquired the update pack. I'll also be covering rules for the major expansions, namely Apocalypse and Awakenings. Those build on top of the core rules, and most of the new rules are exclusive to the expansions, so they're of no interest to anyone playing the core campaign. To avoid confusion, I've banished those expansion rules to their own video, which will come at the end of this video series. Having said that, a few of the expansion rules are intended as updates to the 1.5 core rules, so there will be the very occasional mention of expansion rules before then. Even one or two boxes of this game can be formidable, and if you chose one of the all-in pledges, then you're probably watching this video from amidst the pile of kindling that used to be your board game shelves. So let's take a look at how the various campaigns and expansions fit together. At the centre of the Drunagor universe are two huge campaigns orbiting each other like a binary star system, the core box and the Apocalypse expansion. The campaign in the core box will take the heroes on an adventure fighting the forces of darkness on the continent of Darren. The events in Apocalypse take place after the conclusion of the core campaign, and the developers recommend that you play them in that order. Apocalypse also builds on and extends some of the core rules, which is another good reason to tackle it after you've conquered the core campaign. There are also some expansions which integrate into the core box campaign. The Ruin of Lucanor follows Chapter 3 of the core campaign, and Shadow World follows Chapter 9. The next two expansions, Desert of Hellscar and Rise of the Undead Dragon, take place after the final chapter of the core campaign. Sort of a dessert of side quests. And finally, there's a campaign called Awakenings, which takes place before the events in the core campaign. Realistically, you can play that whenever you like. Just like the Apocalypse expansion, it builds on top of the rules in the core box, which, if you ask me, is a pretty good argument for playing it after the core campaign. By the way, this diagram comes from the website Meister, so thanks to them. The link is in the description below. Because the expansions always require the core box, you may sometimes have questions about how all the components fit together. Fortunately, CGS has you covered, with a page on their website called the Integration Lobby, which is linked below. This page isn't really about storage solutions or consolidating multiple boxes, but rather it tells you how each expansion or add-on can be integrated into your gameplay. Some game components, such as heroes, are compatible with the entire Drunagor universe, so you're free to simply add new ones to your pool of heroes and use them wherever you like. This is called Simple Addition. Add-ons like the Hero Pack can be added right away, or whenever you decide to inject some new content. Ranked monsters can also be added to the core box using Simple Addition. With gameplay expansions, such as Desert of Hellscar, you'll probably want to wait until you start playing the adventure before you add its monsters to the core box. That way, you'll always have new and ugly monstrosities to dismember. Cosmetic additions, such as pet miniatures or chess miniatures from the Spoils of War box, are also straightforward. They simply replace the original components, if you choose to use them. There are also scenario-specific components, such as the intimidating undead dragon. You'll keep those components separate from the core box because they're only used when playing a particular expansion. And finally, there are some cards which can be combined with the core box, but this needs to be done a lot more carefully and selectively. For example, commanders and overlords have their own deck of attack cards in the core box. You can modify these decks with cards from elsewhere, but you'll need to follow the instructions to make sure that decks always contain the correct number of cards and the correct proportions of card types. So it's a sort of deck construction, and the website calls this Selected Edition. We'll eventually be looking at an example of this when we get to the Apocalypse expansion and need to update the deck of chest item cards. The Integration Lobby is impressively comprehensive. There's a rollout for every box and expansion, telling you which integration method to use for each type of component. While we're discussing extras and add-ons, I'll just mention that you have a few different options when it comes to hero boards. The original hero boards have a landscape layout, and you place white cubes on top of skills you haven't acquired yet to indicate that they're locked. In contrast, the newer hero boards have a portrait layout, and they show just the starting skills. Skill upgrades were moved onto cards so that they're out of sight until you acquire them. For these videos, it's a no-brainer to use the newer boards to reduce visual clutter. But the original landscape boards were popular enough with some players that CGS decided to include them in the various stretch goals. So if you own both types, then the choice is yours. You can also purchase an optional add-on of game trays for the newer portrait-style hero boards. Each hero gets 2 trays, with slots for the board and various cards and cubes. It's purely cosmetic, with no gameplay significance, and these aren't included in the core box. I only mention them because I will be using them in this video series, and I don't want anyone to think that their core box is missing anything. And that's a wrap for this first video. Thanks for joining me, and I'm looking forward to releasing more videos in the series over the coming weeks and months. See you there!